Let's talk about our Super Bowl favorites, ladies and gentlemen. We are in the AFC East, and that means the Buffalo Bills. That's right, the Buffalo Bills, not the New England Patriots. The Buffalo Bills are now the monster at the end of the book. And I've written about this a couple of times, and I write about this in the intro to the book. DVOA and wins and playoff odds came out clustered around 500, even more conservatively than usual. So this is not going to sound as impressive as you would expect, that we only have Buffalo with 10.2 mean wins, but that's the favorite. They're the number one team. They make the playoffs in 70% of our simulations. They win the Super Bowl in 10.4% of our simulations. They have the number one projected DVOA, third on offense, fourth on defense, fourth on special teams, and 11th in schedule. I mean, whatever holes they had on the roster, they filled at the draft. I don't know how good those players will be. I think in some ways the difference between Buffalo as Super Bowl favorite and Buffalo as just pretty good, inconsistent team depends a lot on like Kaiir Elam at cornerback and other guys they drafted, James Cook, and what they do with their running backs a little bit, but mostly Elam.
Yeah, let me ask Cale this, because I wrote the Bills chapter in the Almanac. And I was like, man, I kind of hate all the moves the Bills made all this offseason, like from my analytical background. Like none of these really make a lot of sense. One, they paid a player on the wrong side of 30, big free agent money. Von Miller's 33 years old, and he would have a dead cap hit of $21.8 million if they cut him at 35 years old. Like, this is a contract that could go south. Two, they traded up in the first round to draft a non-quarterback, and then they drafted a position of need at cornerback since they lost Levi Wallace in free agency, picking that cornerback Kaiir Elam that you mentioned. In the second round, they possibly reached on a running back in James Cook. Backcast doesn't really love James Cook because he didn't get a ton of work. He's really more of a pass-catching specialist. Seems kind of weird with a second-round pick. In the sixth round, they drafted Matt Ariza, a punter. So it's like all of these anti-analytical moves. But then at the end of the chapter, I'm like, yeah, good job, Bills. You're going for it. You recognize that you have a short-term window, even though you have Josh Allen because his cap hit's about to spike. And so, Cale, my question is, am I kind of giving a halo effect good job to the Bills, where if a team like the Jets did this, I would be killing them? Or do you think it's justifiable that they're kind of going all in, even with maybe the best young quarterback asset in the game?
I mean, the example you give is perfect because I think it's justifiable given situation. I think this is a bit of an all-in move in the sense that, yeah, if the Jets were doing this now off the heels of a, 4-win, 3-win season, yeah, they'd be lambasted. Of course they would. But Buffalo came into this offseason with, the fewest holes on any roster of the NFL, one of the most complete rosters we had seen coming into this offseason. And every need that they had coming into the offseason, they've addressed. They've helped, like Von Miller, I think, is a massive addition to that defense, especially in the front seven. They picked up their second corner with Kaiir Elam after losing Levi Wallace. I think James Cook as a pass-catching back is something that they've kind of been missing, at least is just an additional weapon to throw in there. You're taking a bit of a bet by leaning mostly on Gabriel Davis and Isaiah McKenzie, and I suppose Jamison Crowder as well in there, in terms of the rest of your wide receiver depth below Stephon Diggs. But at this point, the only feasible hole in their roster is what? Offensive line depth. I think they've probably got, one playable guy beyond the starter, and then it kind of drops off talent-wise. But I mean, this is about as complete a roster as you can get. And I think, especially because Josh Allen's contract hasn't kicked in yet, they can afford to take some of these risks just to play in this win-now mode. I mean, Hoyer and Micah Hyde both have contracts coming up. There's a lot of Tre'Davious White's contract extension is still yet to kick in, I believe, but they've got a lot of money ready to hit soon. So these are kind of the plays you need to make. You need to at least win one to justify this level of spending and where they're spending this money before the Josh Allen contract kicks in. So I think it's not, good practice, but I think it's justifiable just given where they're at.
That's actually where I landed, Cale. And the big summary stat of this is that since the new rookie salary scale came in 2011, the number one rule of analytics might be that if you have an inexpensive quarterback, then that's the time to really benefit and win. And with Allen getting close to that contract extension kicking in, no quarterback that's cost 13% or more of his team's cap has won a Super Bowl since 2011. and only 13% of quarterbacks above 13% have actually made it to the Final Four, so reached a conference championship game. It's kind of stark. And like, I get that, like, it hasn't been that long that quarterbacks have been getting that big of a piece of the pie. And like, maybe if Brady were taking a little bit less of a discount, that would move the needle a little bit in that direction. But still, like, these numbers are getting really scary, where he was at a 5.6% cap hit last year. He's at 7.9% this year, and then is projected to be at 18% in 2023 and 17.8% in 2024. So like, Allen deserves to be the most expensive quarterback, he and Mahomes for sure, but like, that's going to be the most expensive quarterback ever in terms of the percentage of the cap his team is paying. And I'm just like, God, it gets so hard to have the necessary depth with how many injuries teams suffer. And I'm like, God, I kind of like that the Bills push their chips in and are really putting a lot of weight on this year and next year. Aaron, do you feel that way too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're going to pay for the Von Miller thing in a couple of years, but they want to win it all this year. They've got the guy. I mean, I think the big thing they need is consistency. Last year, they were really inconsistent, things like that Jacksonville loss, and Allen was really inconsistent. This came up a couple weeks ago on the show when we did our quarterback tiers show, and we were debating whether you would rather have Josh Allen or Justin Herbert. And what we decided was you would rather have Justin Herbert in the regular season and Josh Allen in the playoffs, because Josh Allen's highs are super ridiculously high. Those games he played, those 2 games he played in the playoffs last year, were so absurdly good. But he was not that guy for most of the regular season. For most of the regular season, he was far below Herbert as far as production. So you know that high is possible. So Buffalo is good enough. Their roster is good enough overall that Allen doesn't have to be one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the league for the Bills to win double-digit games and get a high seed in the AFC, maybe even the number 1 seed in the AFC. But they need him to come in the playoffs and have those games. He needs to have the playoff games this year that he had last year. If he does, this team is going to win the Super Bowl.
Do you think that the like breakout playoff performances there were kind of fluky in their timing? Or do you think this is a thing where like Allen plays the best when the lights are brightest? I bring that up because he was just nails in all of the night games that the Bills played in the regular season. Week 5, that was a night game, the revenge game against the Chiefs. They won 38-20. He had 315 yards and 3 touchdowns. The next week, 353-3 in Tennessee. That was the game where they would have won, but Allen slipped on the 4th and 1 sneak as they were going in for the game-winning touchdown. Week 12 in New Orleans, night game, 31-6, 260 and 4 touchdowns. And then week 13 was the crazy weather game against the Patriots, where only threw 145 and 1, but like compared to Mac Jones's 19 passing yards, it was actually like a shockingly impressive performance. I almost feel like, is Allen bored by the regular season games at 1 p.m. when they're playing the Jaguars and crew? And it's just don't care.
The analytics guy in me does not believe in the idea that certain players raise their game when the lights are bright. But it's an interesting anecdote. I tend to think that it's random.
Random. Okay.
That, that he had that game against the Patriots. It also, I think, is maybe the teams he played. The fact is he played well both times they played the Patriots. He played well both times. I mean, not counting the ridiculous weather game. He played well both times they played the Chiefs. Maybe those defenses are just not set up to match him.
Well, are the Jaguars defense set up to match him? I'm not really sure how that happened.
Yes. Josh Allen is apparently set up to match Josh Allen.
I do think, like, while it's like not a thing that I would normally think has consistency, and I think, Aaron, you showed me this too, that like variance has basically no correlation coefficient year to year.
Right.
So like by and large, that doesn't really mean anything. But I think the Bills do intentionally hold some of their cards back during the regular season, in particular in letting Allen rush the ball, which is what makes him such an incredible threat in the playoffs when like there's really nothing you can do defensively to get an advantage with the numbers. But like in the regular season, I think they don't want Allen to run the ball too much and risk getting hurt. And that's another reason why I think the James Cook draft pick makes some sense. I think it's probably why they were going after J.D. McKissick. They were looking specifically for a running back with more of that receiving skill set and potentially good pass blocking skill set too, where the Bills absolutely live in shotgun, right? And like that's actually in shotgun playing like wide, it's actually hard to get those good running lanes. So like as impressed as I've always been with Devin Singletary and how much he breaks tackles, he's always running into like a really tough situation, especially when he's facing a defensive front, because there's not the blockers. They don't have a tight end in there. They're running routes or whatever. And so with more of a pass catching back, maybe that's going to lead to a little bit more of confusion for defenses, like offensive versatility. They can do more things from shotgun. And maybe that's the ticket to win the regular season. Hey, we'll be a little bit better with different types of defensive approaches that we see. And then in the playoffs, yeah, that's when we can unleash Allen and let him run the ball 10 times. But it's not worth getting him hurt, even if you're going to occasionally lose to a Jaguars out there.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look through the Bills roster and be like, this is the roster where the only question you're asking is, where can they least afford to have injuries other than the quarterback position? Because they are so strong everywhere. And I mean, I will say, I even think that you mentioned offensive line depth. They signed Greg Van Rotten. That's a guy who started some games in the past for the Jets. They
Panthers
signed David
legend.
Quessenberry. That's a guy who started for Tennessee. He had a lot of blown blocks last year, but as your backup, I mean, like, I feel like they've got depth at almost every position. They've got starters at pretty much every, but this team is really loaded. I do think that our simulation is a little too conservative. You know, it's something that I need to figure out why it comes out so conservative, and in particular, why it came out so conservative this year. It's really hard to see a situation where the Bills win less than 10 games unless they have major injuries.